The massive oak doors of the Drummond mansion exploded inward. Temperance Brightwater stepped through the threshold, her worn boots silent against marble that cost more than most folks saw in a lifetime. Dust motes swirled around her threadbare dress as she faced the man who owned half of West Texas. Cassius Drummond sat slumped in his wheelchair, legs hidden beneath a wool blanket. Once those legs had carried him across battlefields and cattle drives. Now they hung useless as broken fence posts. "I can heal you." Her voice cut through the silence like a blade through silk. "All I ask for is your kitchen leftovers." Drummond's laughter filled the room. It bounced off crystal chandeliers and oil paintings of prize bulls. His foreman Brutus Kane stepped forward, hand resting on his pistol grip. Two other men flanked the doorway. "You hear that, boys?" Drummond's voice dripped with mockery. "The beggar girl thinks she's a miracle worker." Tempe's spine stayed straight. Her grandmother's voice whispered in her memory about dignity, about standing tall when the world tried to crush you down. She had walked 15 miles through dust and heat to reach this place. Her stomach gnawed at itself with hunger. "Laugh all you want, Mr. Drummond. When you're ready to walk again, you know where to find me." She turned toward the door. Her bare feet had carried her this far. They would carry her home if needed. Outside, Drummond's prize stallion Thunder screamed. The animal thrashed against the fence posts, foam covering its midnight coat. Men shouted. Someone yelled about a rattlesnake bite. Tempe ran. The stallion's eyes rolled white with pain. Its front legs buckled. Kane raised his rifle, ready to end the animal's suffering. $1,000 horse reduced to buzzard food. Tempe dropped to her knees in the dirt. Her hands found the puncture wounds on Thunder's neck. The flesh burned hot with poison. She closed her eyes and let her grandmother's words flow through her lips, words older than Texas, older than memory. The stallion's convulsions stopped. Thunder rose to his feet. He shook his mane and walked to the water trough like nothing had happened. The snake bites were gone, not healed. Gone. Silence stretched across the courtyard like morning fog. Drummond's wheelchair creaked as he rolled closer. His eyes studied Tempe's face, searching for tricks or explanations that made sense. He found none. "How?" "My grandmother taught me." Tempe wiped dirt from her palms. "Some knowledge gets passed down through blood and necessity." Kane's hand still gripped his rifle. The other men shuffled their feet, unsure whether to be amazed or afraid. In their world, miracles came with prices that honest folks couldn't afford to pay. Drummond wheeled himself to Thunder's side. He ran his fingers over smooth skin where puncture wounds had been moments before. The stallion nuzzled his shoulder, seeking sugar cubes that used to live in his vest pocket. "What do you really want?" His voice had lost its mocking edge. "Food." Tempe's honesty cut through the evening air. "Enough to keep breathing, nothing more." "And you think you can fix these?" He gestured at his useless legs. "I know I can." The certainty in her voice made Kane step back. Men who dealt in cattle and gunpowder understood strength when they heard it. This slip of a girl possessed something they couldn't measure or control. Drummond studied her face. Hunger had carved hollow spaces under her cheekbones. Her dress was clean but patched in a dozen places. Still, she stood before him without begging or cowering. Most folks who approached his mansion came with hats in hand and heads bowed low. "The doctors in Dallas said I'd never walk again." "White doctors." Tempe's words carried no bitterness, just fact. "They know bones and blood. I know deeper things." A dust devil spun across the courtyard, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Thunder whinnied and trotted to the far fence, alive and whole. The impossible made ordinary by her touch. Drummond's empire stretched from the Rio Grande to the Red River. He commanded thousands of cattle and hundreds of men. But power meant nothing when your own body betrayed you. Every morning he woke to the same cruel truth. Every night he went to bed a broken man. "If you're lying to me, girl, then you'll still be sitting in that chair tomorrow." Tempe brushed dust from her skirt. "Same as today, same as yesterday." Kane cleared his throat. "Boss, maybe we should think about this. Folks in town won't take kindly to unusual happenings. Folks in town aren't sitting in this chair." The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky red as spilled blood. Soon darkness would claim the land. Tempe would walk those 15 miles back to her shack by moonlight, stomach empty, hope deferred once more. Or everything could change. Drummond wheeled closer. His eyes held the desperate calculation of a man with nothing left to lose. What would you need? A place to work, time, your trust. Trust. He spoke the word like it tasted bitter. That's a rare commodity around here. Rare things hold the most value. Thunder nickered from across the yard, living proof that impossible things happened when the right person possessed the right knowledge. Drummond had built his fortune by recognizing opportunity when it presented itself. This felt like the biggest gamble of his life. Kane, prepare the guest quarters in the servants' wing. His voice carried the authority that had carved an empire from raw land. Quietly, Tempe nodded once. She had expected nothing and received everything. Her grandmother's spirit seemed to whisper approval on the evening breeze. Tomorrow the real work would begin. The servants' quarters smelled of lye soap and old wood. Tempe set her medicine bag on the narrow cot. Through the single window, she watched ranch hands tend their evening chores. Their movements carried the weight of men who worked for wages they couldn't live on. Cook refused to meet her eyes during supper. The woman slapped a plate of cold beans and hard bread on the kitchen table, then retreated to her corner. Other staff whispered behind cupped hands. Their fear filled the room like smoke. Tempe ate in silence. The beans tasted better than anything she'd had in weeks. The next morning, she knocked on Drummond's study door before dawn. He sat behind his massive desk, ledger books spread before him. Numbers told stories of cattle prices and land disputes. His empire lived and died by arithmetic. You're early. Healing doesn't keep bankers hours. She knelt beside his wheelchair. Her hands found his knees through the wool blanket. The flesh underneath felt cold as winter ground. No blood moved through those channels. No messages traveled from brain to bone. Tempe closed her eyes. Her grandmother's voice whispered instructions passed down through generations of women who learned medicine in slave quarters and hidden places. Knowledge that survived because it had to. Warmth flowed from her palms into his legs. Drummond's breath caught. I felt something like pins and needles. Good. Tempe kept her hand steady. Your body remembers how to live. We just need to remind it. For an hour she worked in silence. Sweat beaded on her forehead. This kind of healing demanded everything she had, every breath, every heartbeat, every prayer her grandmother had ever taught her. When she finished, Drummond could wiggle his toes. Word spread through the ranch like wildfire. Hands whispered in the bunkhouse. Cook crossed herself 3 times while kneading bread. Kane watched Tempe with eyes that held equal parts suspicion and wonder. By afternoon, strangers appeared on the horizon, men with clean clothes and careful eyes. They rode the boundary lines, studying the ranch through spyglasses. Federal marshals, Kane reported to Drummond, asking questions in town about unusual occurrences. Drummond's jaw tightened. The government only showed interest when money or power hung in the balance. His enemies had been busy. That evening, Dr. Elias Morton arrived unannounced. His black medical bag and pressed suit marked him as a man of science and respectability. He found Tempe washing dishes in the kitchen. I hear you've been practicing medicine without proper credentials. Tempe dried her hands on a worn towel. I hear you've been letting folks die with proper credentials. Morton's face flushed red. What you're doing is dangerous, illegal. These people need real medical attention, not folk remedies and superstition. Mr. Drummond is walking better than he has in months. Temporary improvement, false hope. Morton stepped closer. I could have you arrested for fraud. Tempe met his gaze without flinching. You could try. The next morning brought visitors of a different sort. Cornelius Drummond arrived with a small entourage of well-dressed men. His resemblance to his brother was unmistakable. But where Cassius carried the rough edges of a man who'd built his fortune through sweat and risk, Cornelius possessed the smooth confidence of inherited wealth. He embraced his brother with theatrical warmth. Cassius, you look wonderful, much better than I expected. I'm healing. So I've heard. Cornelius glanced around the study. The whole territory is talking about your miracle worker. They say she brought thunder back from death's door. They say a lot of things. Cornelius settled into a leather chair. His eyes found Drummond's legs, searching for signs of improvement. The family is concerned about your judgment. This situation has attracted unwanted attention. What situation? A woman of questionable background, practicing medicine without license, living on your property. Cornelius spoke each word with careful precision. People are beginning to talk. Let them talk. You can't afford to let them talk, brother. Your position in this territory depends on respect, stability. When folks start whispering about witchcraft and unnatural healing, that undermines everything you've built. Drummond's hands gripped his wheelchair arms. I can feel my legs again. Can you? Really? Cornelius leaned forward. Or are you so desperate that you're imagining improvement where none exists? That afternoon, Tempe found broken glass in her medicine bag. Someone had shattered her grandmother's mixing bowl, the one passed down through 3 generations. She swept the pieces into her palm, each fragment sharp enough to draw blood. Cook watched from the doorway. Accidents happen in a busy kitchen. Tempe met her eyes. Yes, they do. That night she heard footsteps outside her window. Men moved through shadows, checking doors and windows. Their boots crunched on gravel with military precision. These weren't ranch hands making midnight rounds. She pressed herself against the wall, listening. Voices carried on the wind. Federal marshals want everything documented. Boss says make it look natural. Nothing that points back to us. What about the girl? She's the problem. Remove the problem, everything else falls into place. Tempe's hand found the leather pouch around her neck. Inside were seeds her grandmother had given her. Seeds for healing. Seeds for protection. Seeds for revenge if the need arose. She had hoped revenge would never be necessary. The next morning, Drummond managed to stand for 10 seconds. His legs shook with effort, but they held his weight. Tempe steadied him with careful hands, feeling the tremor of muscles learning to remember their purpose. How long before I can walk? Your body will tell us. She guided him back to the wheelchair. Healing happens on its own schedule. Kane burst through the study doors. Boss, we got problems. Someone poisoned the main water well. Half the cattle are sick. Drummond's face went stone cold. How bad? Doc Morton says it's some kind of plant poison, something that grows wild in the territory. Kane's eyes shifted to Tempe, something a person with plant knowledge might recognize. The accusation hung in the air like gun smoke. Tempe felt the weight of suspicious stares. In their minds, she had become the convenient explanation for every misfortune. I heal, she said quietly. I don't poison. Maybe. Kane's hand rested on his pistol. Maybe not. Drummond studied the faces around him. His brother, his foreman, the men who had served him for years. All of them watched him with calculating eyes, waiting to see which way he would lean. Kane organized search parties. Find the source of the contamination. His voice carried absolute authority. And Kane, anyone who suggests Miss Brightwater is responsible for this will answer to me personally. The room emptied quickly. Only Tempe remained, standing beside his chair in the sudden silence. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Drummond stared out the window at his poisoned land. This is just the beginning. The federal marshals wore badges that gleamed too bright in the morning sun. They sat their horses with the easy confidence of men who carried government authority in their saddlebags. Their leader, Marshal Hayes, had eyes that missed nothing and recorded everything. Mr. Drummond, we need to discuss some irregularities that have come to our attention. Drummond met them in his courtyard. His wheelchair positioned him at a disadvantage, but his voice carried the weight of a man who had never backed down from anything. What kind of irregularities? Reports of unusual medical practices, unlicensed healing, activities that might endanger public safety. Tempe watched from the kitchen window. These men had not ridden 2 days from Austin to investigate folk medicine. Something deeper moved beneath their official concern. Hayes dismounted and approached Drummond's chair. "We've also received reports about your mental fitness to manage such extensive holdings. Some folks worry that desperation might cloud your judgment." The words hung in the air like storm clouds. Drummond's knuckles whitened as he gripped his wheelchair arms. "My judgment is fine, Marshal. I'm sure it is." Hayes glanced toward the kitchen window where Tempe stood. "But appearances matter in matters of public trust." After the marshals left, Cornelius emerged from the house. He had remained conspicuously absent during the official visit. "Unfortunate business, brother. These federal investigations can drag on for months." He adjusted his gold watch chain. "Perhaps it would be wise to distance yourself from anything that might invite further scrutiny." Drummond studied his brother's face. "You mean distance myself from the person who's helping me walk again?" "I mean protect what our family has built over 3 generations." That afternoon, Tempe found Drummond in his study, staring at legal documents spread across his desk. Her daily healing session had been postponed while he met with lawyers and accountants. "The marshals want a public demonstration," he said without looking up. "Proof that my recovery is genuine and not the result of fraud or coercion. And if I refuse, they'll find other ways to investigate, ways that might not end well for either of us." Tempe approached his desk. The legal papers bore official seals and intimidating language, words designed to crush hope and silence dissent. "There's something you should know about those marshals." She kept her voice low. "I recognized one of them. He was at my father's funeral 8 years ago, asking questions about our land." Drummond looked up sharply. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that come before forced sales and convenient accidents." Her hands clenched into fists. "My father owned 20 acres of good grazing land, prime territory for cattle drives. He refused to sell. What happened to him? Official reports said he fell from his horse and broke his neck." Tempe's voice carried the weight of old grief. "Funny thing about that horse, it was the gentlest mare in 3 counties. Never thrown a rider in its life." The pieces began forming a pattern in Drummond's mind. Federal interest. Cornelius's sudden concern for family reputation. The convenient timing of accusations against Tempe. "They're not here to investigate healing. No, they're here to take what you've built." She moved to the window, watching dust devils dance across the courtyard. "Same way they took what my family had." That evening brought unexpected visitors. Jackson Steele arrived with a dozen riders, their horses bearing his triangle brand. They set up camp on the disputed boundary between his territory and Drummond's, close enough to make a statement without quite crossing into open provocation. Kane reported their presence with barely controlled anger. "They're testing our water sources, claiming some kind of survey right." "What kind of survey?" "The kind that happens when someone expects ownership to change hands soon." Drummond felt the walls closing in. His enemies had coordinated their attack with military precision. Legal pressure from the marshals, family pressure from Cornelius, territorial pressure from Steele, all designed to force him into a position where surrender became the only rational choice. But Drummond had never been rational about surrendering. The next morning he stood for 30 seconds without assistance. His legs trembled with effort, but they held. Tempe's hands hovered nearby, ready to catch him if he fell. "You're getting stronger." "Not fast enough." He settled back into his wheelchair. "They won't wait much longer." Dr. Morton arrived that afternoon with a wagon full of medical equipment and official documentation. He had apparently decided that if he couldn't stop Tempe's healing, he would claim credit for it. "I've come to provide proper medical oversight for Mr. Drummond's treatment," he announced. "The Territorial Medical Board requires licensed supervision for any experimental procedures." Cornelius appeared as if summoned. "Excellent timing, Doctor. My brother needs proper medical care, not folk remedies." The trap became clear. Morton would observe Tempe's methods, claim them as conventional medicine, then take over the treatment. Cornelius would have his brother under proper medical authority. The marshals would have their evidence of responsible oversight, and Tempe would be discredited and removed. I won't work under his supervision, she said quietly. Then perhaps your work here is finished. Cornelius smiled with the satisfaction of a man who had just played a winning hand. Drummond faced a choice that would define the rest of his life. Surrender to the safe path his brother had constructed, accept Morton's oversight and preserve his empire, continue healing under conditions designed to eventually eliminate Tempe's influence, or stand with the woman who had given him hope when doctors offered only despair. He looked at his brother, at Morton, at the legal documents and medical certificates that represented everything his society considered proper and respectable. Then he looked at Tempe. She stood straight-backed in her patched dress, ready to walk away rather than compromise the knowledge her grandmother had died protecting. Dr. Morton, your services won't be needed. Cornelius's face darkened. Brother, you're making a serious mistake. Maybe. Drummond's voice carried the finality of a man who had chosen his path, but it's my mistake to make. That night, riders moved through the darkness beyond the ranch boundaries. They carried no torches, made no unnecessary noise. Professional men doing professional work. Tempe lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of careful preparation. Tomorrow would bring the public demonstration the marshals demanded. She would show the territory that miracles still happened in a world that had forgotten how to believe in them. She touched the leather pouch around her neck. Her grandmother's seeds rattled softly against each other. Seeds for healing, seeds for protection, seeds for the kind of desperate measures that might soon become necessary. The wind howled across the prairie, carrying the scent of distant storms. Change was coming whether they were ready or not. By morning, everything would be different. The crowd gathered like vultures circling carrion. Townspeople, ranchers, government officials, and the curious rode in from 50 miles around. Word had spread through the territory that Cassius Drummond would prove his recovery in public view, or be exposed as a fraud. Marshal Hayes positioned himself on the mansion's front porch, close enough to observe every detail. Dr. Morton stood beside him with his medical bag, ready to provide official commentary. The Committee for Public Safety clustered near their wagons, faces hard with righteous certainty. Cornelius arrived fashionably late with Jackson Steele at his side. Two territorial power brokers united in concern for public welfare. Their timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Drummond emerged from the house under his own power. His legs moved stiffly, but they moved. Each step represented weeks of Tempe's healing touch, hours of whispered prayers and strength borrowed from reserves deeper than bone and blood. The crowd murmured. Some had expected to see him wheeled out in defeat. Others had hoped for dramatic miracle. Reality fell somewhere between expectation and disappointment. Tempe followed at a respectful distance. Her patched dress and bare feet marked her as different from everyone present. She carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hayes called out, "we're here to witness Mr. Drummond demonstrate his claimed recovery. This examination will determine whether proper medical procedures were followed or if fraud was committed." Drummond walked 20 paces to a wooden post and back. His gait was careful but steady. No assistance, no obvious deception. The marshals found nothing to challenge. Dr. Morton stepped forward. "While movement has clearly been restored, I must examine the patient to verify that proper medical standards were maintained during treatment." He knelt beside Drummond and began his examination. Professional touches, clinical observations, the performance of legitimacy for public consumption. "Remarkable recovery," Morton announced, clearly the result of sound medical principles properly applied. The crowd began to disperse, satisfied that order had been maintained and authority respected. Another territorial curiosity resolved through official channels, but Tempe stepped forward. "Tell them about the bullet wound." Silence fell across the courtyard. Morton's hands stilled on his medical bag. Hayes leaned forward with sudden interest. "What bullet wound?" Drummond asked. Tempe's eyes found Kane in the crowd. "3 days ago, your foreman took a rifle shot through the shoulder, clean through." Doc Morton said the wound was beyond treatment. Infection had set in. Arm would have to come off. Kane instinctively touched his left shoulder. Under his shirt, perfect skin covered what had been a festering hole. "Show them," Tempe said quietly. Kane looked to Drummond, who nodded once. The foreman unbuttoned his shirt and pulled it away from his shoulder. The crowd pressed closer, searching for scar tissue or fresh bandaging. They found nothing. No mark. No evidence that metal had ever torn through flesh and bone. Dr. Morton's face went pale. "This is impossible. I examined that wound myself." "You said the arm had to be amputated to save his life," Tempe continued. "You had already prepared the surgical tools." The crowd's murmur grew louder. This wasn't gradual recovery explained by conventional medicine. This was something else entirely. "Witchcraft," someone whispered. The word spread through the gathered people like fire through dry grass. Faces that had been curious became fearful. Hands moved toward weapons and holy symbols. Hayes stepped down from the porch. "Miss Brightwater, you'll need to come with us for questioning." "On what charges?" "Practicing medicine without license, fraud, endangering public safety." His hand rested on his pistol grip. "Suspicion of unnatural practices." Drummond moved to stand beside Tempe. His legs held firm despite the tremor in his voice. "She's under my protection." "Your protection doesn't extend to federal crimes." Cornelius approached with theatrical concern. "Brother, surely you can see that this situation has gotten out of hand. These allegations must be investigated properly." "What allegations?" "That she healed people your doctors couldn't help. That she's deceiving desperate folks with dangerous superstitions." Dr. Morton's voice carried wounded professional pride. "That bullet wound was clearly misdiagnosed in the first place." Kane pulled his shirt back on. "You sawed through the kitchen table preparing to take my arm off. That wasn't misdiagnosis." The crowd shifted uneasily. Lines were being drawn between those who valued miracle and those who feared it. Between those who needed hope and those who profited from despair. Jackson Steele spoke for the first time. "Seems to me this territory's got enough real problems without adding witchcraft to the mix." His writers nodded agreement. Hard men who dealt in practical matters of cattle and land. They had no use for healing that couldn't be bought or controlled. Marshal Hayes produced iron shackles from his saddlebags. "Miss Brightwater, extend your hands." Tempe looked at the restraints. Metal forged to contain and control. Chains that would drag her away from the healing work her grandmother had died protecting. She closed her eyes and felt the leather pouch around her neck. Seeds rattled against each other with familiar comfort. Her grandmother's voice whispered instructions for desperate times. "Marshal Hayes," she said quietly, "before you take me away, there's something you should know about that poisoned well." Hayes paused, shackles half opened. "What about it?" "The plant that contaminated your water. It doesn't grow wild in this territory." Her voice carried across the silent courtyard. "It has to be cultivated, planted deliberately, tended carefully." Dr. Morton shifted nervously. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I know plants, all plants, including the ones that heal and the ones that kill." She opened her eyes and looked directly at Cornelius. "Including the ones that cause slow paralysis when added to someone's food over many months." The words hit Drummond like physical blows. His brother's concerned visits, the gradual weakness that preceded his collapse, the convenient timing of everything that followed. Cornelius laughed, but the sound carried false notes. "Surely you're not suggesting that I poisoned my own brother." "I'm suggesting that someone with access to his food and knowledge of rare plants has been very patient." Tempe's gaze never wavered. "Someone who needed him weak but not dead. Someone who could benefit from taking control of his affairs." The crowd sensed blood in the water. Accusations of witchcraft were frightening but distant. Family betrayal and murder were crimes they understood. Hayes looked between the brothers with calculating eyes. Federal marshals dealt in evidence and testimony. If corruption reached this deep, his own position might be compromised. "These are serious allegations." "Search his saddlebags," Tempe said. "He carries the antidote with him. A man who administers poison must always have the cure nearby in case of accidents. Cornelius stepped backward. This is absurd. You can't possibly believe the word of a woman who claims to work miracles. But Drummond was already moving toward his brother's horse. His newly healed legs carried him with purpose born of terrible certainty. In the leather saddlebags, his hands found small glass vials filled with clear liquid. He held them up to the light. "What are these, Cornelius?" "Medicine, for headaches." Tempe approached the vials. She uncorked one and breathed deeply of its contents. Her grandmother's training identified compounds and purposes. "This will neutralize the poison in your system," she told Drummond. "The poison that's still killing you, even though you can walk again." The crowd fell silent. Brother faced brother across 20 feet of dust and 30 years of shared history. The empire that Cassius had built with blood and determination hung in the balance. Cornelius reached for his pistol, but Jackson Steele's men were faster. Iron appeared in practiced hands, aimed with professional precision. The territorial balance had shifted in an instant. "Now that's interesting," Steele drawled. "Seems like there might be some property changing hands soon after all." The demonstration was over, but the reckoning had just begun. The confession spilled from Cornelius like poison from an infected wound. Names, dates, bribes paid to federal marshals, contracts with Jackson Steele to divide the territory after Cassius's convenient death. 3 years of careful planning destroyed by one moment of exposed desperation. Steele's men kept their guns trained on the crowd while their boss calculated new possibilities. A living Cassius Drummond complicated the land grab, but complications could be managed with enough firepower. Marshal Hayes found himself trapped between competing corruptions. His federal badge carried no weight when surrounded by hired guns and territorial power brokers. He backed slowly toward his horse. Dr. Morton clutched his medical bag and tried to disappear into the crowd. His professional reputation lay in ruins, but reputation could be rebuilt elsewhere. Staying alive mattered more than maintaining dignity. Drummond felt the antidote's effects coursing through his system. Strength returned to muscles that had been slowly dying for months. His brother's patient murder was finally being undone, but the cure came too late to save what they had been to each other. 30 years, he said to Cornelius. 30 years you waited for me to die. You were supposed to die quickly." Cornelius's voice held the petulance of a plan gone wrong. "The poison was meant to stop your heart within weeks. Instead, you just got weaker and weaker. So you decided to help things along with that riding accident. That was improvisation. You always were too stubborn to die on schedule." The crowd pressed closer, hungry for details of betrayal that would feed gossip for generations. Brothers destroying each other over land and money. The oldest story in the West played out with fresh blood. Tempe moved away from the spectacle. Her work here was finished. Drummond would live. The poison's hold was broken. Justice would follow whatever course men with guns decided it should follow. She had healing to do elsewhere. "Where are you going?" Drummond called after her. "Home." The word carried all the weariness of someone who had given everything she had to give. "This is your home now." Tempe stopped walking but didn't turn around. "Your brother was right about one thing. This territory has no place for people like me. Then we'll make a place." The words hung in the dusty air between them, a promise or a threat, depending on who heard it. The crowd fell silent, sensing that something larger than family betrayal was being decided. Drummond stepped away from his brother and the armed men and the federal marshals. His legs carried him steadily across the courtyard to where Tempe stood with her back turned to everything she was leaving behind. "I'm deeding half the ranch to the families in Freedman's Creek," he announced. "Good grazing land, water rights, everything they need to build something lasting." Gasps rippled through the crowd. This went beyond personal healing into territory that challenged the fundamental order of things. Rich white men didn't give land to poor black families. "Not in Texas, not anywhere," Jackson Steele laughed. "You've lost your mind, Drummond. That deal will never hold up in territorial court." Then we'll make our own courts. With what authority? The authority of people who choose to live differently. Steele's amusement died. This wasn't the rambling of a sick man or the gratitude of someone temporarily healed. This was revolution dressed in the language of property law. "Boys," he said to his gunmen, "seems like we need to restore some sanity to these proceedings." The hired guns shifted position, surrounding Drummond and Tempe, professional killers who had ended disputes over far less valuable stakes. Their weapons glinted in the afternoon sun, but Tempe stepped forward. She reached into the leather pouch around her neck and withdrew seeds her grandmother had given her. Seeds saved for desperate times when healing wasn't enough and protection demanded a different kind of power. She scattered them on the ground in a wide circle around herself and Drummond. Ancient words rose from her throat, carrying the accumulated prayers of generations who had survived impossible odds through knowledge passed down in whispers and dreams. The wind began to change. It started as a gentle breeze that stirred the scattered seeds. Then it grew stronger, pulling dust from the earth and sending it spiraling upward. The spiral widened, encompassing the courtyard and the people gathered within it. But this wasn't destruction. It was revelation. The spinning dust carried something that touched the hearts of everyone present. Memories surfaced unbidden, times when they had been helped by someone different from themselves, moments when kindness had come from unexpected sources, love that had crossed the barriers society built to keep people apart. Jackson Steele lowered his pistol. His face carried confusion as foreign emotions battled familiar hatred. His hired guns looked to him for orders that wouldn't come. Marshal Hayes stared at his badge with fresh understanding of what justice might actually mean. The Committee for Public Safety found their certainty crumbling under the weight of unexpected compassion. Even Dr. Morton felt the barriers around his professional pride beginning to crack. The wind subsided. The seeds had done their work, not by forcing change but by opening hearts that had been closed by fear and greed and the terrible weight of tradition. Cornelius stood alone in the aftermath, untouched by the transformation around him. His corruption ran too deep for any healing to reach, but the men who had supported him looked at each other with different eyes. "I think," Marshal Hayes said slowly, "that I need to file a report about federal corruption in territorial land disputes." Jackson Steele holstered his weapon. "Seems like there's enough good grazing land for everyone in this territory. No need for anyone to be shooting anyone else over it." The Committee for Public Safety began to disperse. Their righteous anger had been replaced by something harder to sustain but more valuable to nurture: understanding. The revolutionary idea that different people might have equal worth. Tempe swayed on her feet. The final healing had drained everything she had. Her grandmother's seeds lay scattered and empty around her feet. The power that had been passed down through generations was spent, but it had been spent well. Drummond caught her as she fell. His strong arms supported the woman who had given him back his life and shown him what life was truly for. "Is it finished?" she whispered. "No," he said, looking around at faces that still struggled between old hatred and new possibility. "But it's begun." The revolution would be quiet. It would happen one conversation at a time, one shared meal at a time, one act of courage at a time. The seeds Tempe had planted would grow slowly, but they would grow. Change was coming to the territory, not through force or law or federal mandate, but through the most powerful force of all: the choice to see enemies as neighbors and strangers as family. 6 months later, Tempe knelt in the herb garden behind the new medical clinic. Her hands worked the soil where healing plants grew in neat rows: lavender for calming, willow bark for pain, echinacea for fighting infection. Knowledge that had once been whispered in secret now grew openly under the Texas sun. Dr. Morton approached with a ledger tucked under his arm. His medical bag had been replaced by notebooks filled with careful observations about plant medicine and traditional healing methods. Pride had given way to curiosity. Arrogance had yielded to learning. "The Henderson boys' fever broke this morning," he reported. Your grandmother's willow bark tea worked faster than anything I had in my supplies. Tempe nodded without looking up from her planting. Grandmother always said the earth provides what people need if they know how to ask properly. The clinic served everyone regardless of color or ability to pay. Former slaves worked alongside former masters, united by the common experience of sickness and healing. Pain recognized no social boundaries. Neither did relief. Drummond's land redistribution had proceeded slowly but steadily. Families who had never owned anything beyond the clothes on their backs now held deeds to good grazing land. They built homes, planted crops, raised cattle alongside the man who had once terrorized the territory. Change came in small increments, a shared meal between former enemies, children playing together while their parents worked side by side, old hatred dying one conversation at a time. Kane supervised the construction of a new schoolhouse on what had been disputed boundary land. His shoulder moved freely, unmarked by the bullet wound that should have cost him his arm. He had become Tempe's most vocal advocate, telling anyone who would listen about the healing that doctors called impossible. Jackson Steele kept his distance but caused no trouble. His cattle grazed peacefully alongside Drummond herds. Profit mattered more than prejudice when peace proved more profitable than conflict. Marshal Hayes had indeed filed his report about federal corruption. Cornelius now resided in a territorial prison, awaiting trial for attempted murder and conspiracy to defraud. His co-conspirators had scattered to other territories where their crimes were unknown. The Committee for Public Safety had disbanded. Some members joined the effort to build integrated communities. Others moved away, unable to reconcile their old beliefs with new realities. Fear could be healed, but it had to want healing first. Tempe rose from the herb garden and walked to the clinic's front porch. Drummond sat in a rocking chair, reading letters from other territorial governors interested in their experiment with shared prosperity. His legs stretched out comfortably, strong and healthy. "Letter from the governor of New Mexico," he said. "Wants to know if our model could work in other places. Could it? Depends on whether they have someone willing to offer miracles for leftovers." Tempe smiled at the memory of that desperate day. She had been hungry and hopeless, with nothing to offer but knowledge others considered worthless. Now that knowledge helped dozens of people each week. Her supernatural healing abilities were gone, spent in that final moment when she chose to heal hearts instead of bodies. But she had discovered something better. The medicine her grandmother taught contained wisdom that didn't require miracles, plants that actually worked, treatments that could be taught and shared and passed down to new generations. The real magic had never been in her hands. It had been in the knowledge itself. A wagon approached the clinic, dust rising from its wheels. A woman sat on the driver's bench, holding a fevered child in her arms. Her clothes marked her as one of the new settlers, a former slave who had traveled hundreds of miles seeking the community where healing happened without regard to social position. The woman climbed down from her wagon with careful movements. Her child burned with sickness that she couldn't fight alone. She approached the clinic porch with the same desperate hope Tempe had carried to Drummond's mansion. "Please," she said. "My daughter is dying. I don't have money to pay, but I'll work, I'll clean, I'll cook, whatever you need." Tempe stood and opened the clinic door. "Bring her inside, let's see what we can do." No miracles, no supernatural intervention. Just knowledge applied with compassion and skill, learned through generations of people who had survived by helping each other. The woman carried her child through the doorway. Dr. Morton appeared with his medical supplies, ready to combine traditional medicine with plant-based treatments. Kane arrived to help however he could. A community gathered around one sick child, united in the belief that everyone deserved care regardless of their ability to pay for it. Outside, the sun set over land that had once been divided by hatred and greed. Now it was slowly being transformed into something unprecedented in the territory's history. A place where former enemies worked together, where knowledge was shared freely, where the content of character mattered more than the color of skin or the weight of purse. The revolution continued one patient at a time. Drummond watched from his rocking chair as lights appeared in windows across the valley. Each light represented a family that had found something they had never expected to find in the harsh Texas territory. Hope, community, the radical possibility that things could be better than they had ever been before. The transformation wasn't complete, probably never would be. Old prejudices died hard. Economic inequality couldn't be solved overnight. Some hearts remained close to change, but progress was being made. Seeds were taking root. The next generation would inherit a world slightly better than the one their parents had known. Sometimes that was miracle enough. Tempe emerged from the clinic, wiping her hands on a clean towel. The child's fever was breaking. Another life saved through knowledge and care rather than supernatural intervention. She sat beside Drummond on the porch, both of them looking out over the community they had helped create. Two people who had started as enemies and become something deeper than friends. Partners in the revolutionary act of treating all people with dignity. The stars appeared overhead, bright and countless in the clear Texas sky. Somewhere among them, perhaps her grandmother's spirit smiled approval at knowledge shared and healing multiplied. The work would continue tomorrow, and the day after that, and for all the days to come, because healing, like hope, was not a miracle that happened once. It was a choice that happened every day. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.